The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Hi, Julie. This is Paul. Listen, I've got 2 friends I want to bring home to dinner, and we'll be there in about half an hour. Can you make it? Good. Wonderful. So long.
Aha, company for dinner in half an hour. Well, little did he know that he was going to get dinner in half an hour anyway, because I just got home. Well, I'll give him ham dinner in half an hour today on the French Chef. Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. Well, suddenly it happens to most everybody that you get company coming for dinner and they give you a half-hour notice. Well, even so, you can make a very good dinner, and I've got a timer here and we'll just set it and see how we do. And whenever you're faced with a problem like that, it's good to start out with parsley and shallots, because you always have to have them anyway, or scallions, and then you can gather your thoughts a little bit. I find that I have sort of a group of little fast dinners that I can do very quickly, and I just write them down on cards. And then whenever I get in a spot like this, I can use one of these menus, and I've got one here because I happen to have some ham. And this is called a ham dinner, and we start out with a little first course of tomate farcie à la portugaise, which just means stuffed tomatoes, and then ham in Madeira sauce on a bed of pureed peas, and braised leeks, and ending with cherries jubilee. And then on the other side, this shows how really smart I am, I have how to begin it, because you have to start on what takes the longest to cook. And the first thing I have is cherries macerate. That's for the cherries jubilee. So I'll clean up my thought processes here and get to the cherries. And these, I'm going to use these canned sour apple pie cherries, because I think they have a little more flavor than those Bing cherries. And then, just to give them a little extra flavor, we will have a little bit of grated lemon rind. You could have lemon juice too, but we really don't need lemon juice because these are sour cherries anyway. And then a little bit of cognac is always rather nice. It's nice with the cherries if they sit in their maceration for a while. And then a little bit of sugar. And there they are, ready for their final phase. I'll put in a little tiny bit of cinnamon too. And then the next longest thing to cook are the braised leeks that we're going to have. And leeks are just a lovely vegetable. They're these long things that look like elongated scallions, and you cut the roots off. Then I'm going to use just mostly the bottom part of them, and I can save this green part for soup, and then cut them in half. And then they've got to be washed very quickly. I've got the dish I'm going to cook them in. You want to be sure to spread the leaves apart as you wash them, because there's often quite a bit of dirt in. It's so terrible to eat crunched down on pieces of dirt and sand. So they're all washed. And then I've got some boiling hot water, and I'll just put in about ½ an inch of water, and then they're ready to cook. Put them on the stove and put in a little bit of salt and butter. Just sprinkle some salt on top. You could cook these in a chicken stock if you wanted to, but we're going to use that for something else. We don't want to repeat ourselves too much. And then cover them up with some aluminum foil, and they'll take about 15 or 20 minutes to cook. There. Then I'll put them over on another burner and they can just cook the way they like. And then the next longest things to cook are the peas. And this is going to be a puree of peas with watercress. And that's very nice. And if I had time to do fresh peas, they'd be very good, but I only have time to do frozen peas. And I always like to let them defrost a little bit, so if I know I'm going to have peas at night, I usually take them out of the freezer and put them into the refrigerator so that they will thaw out a little bit. And then I'm going to cook them in some canned chicken stock. If I had homemade chicken stock, that would be very nice too. Just put in about half of a cup and a little bit of salt. I think with frozen peas, you need a little extra flavor, and I'm also going to put some butter in too. Putting a bit of butter, that's just about 1.5 tablespoons in either fresh or canned peas or even frozen ones while they cook, just gives them a little bit more flavor. We'll see how our leeks are doing now. They want to cook fairly fast. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. And the peas I want to cook at top speed covered. And then we have our next thing on the list, which is tomatoes fix. So how are we doing on time now? Well, that's only 5 minutes. I think we're doing very well. And it's always nice when you're having company to have a little tiny bit of a first course. And it can be a very simple thing. And it's just what it says it is, an appetizer to whet the appetite. So we have some nice fresh tomatoes, which I'll cut in half, and then squeeze the juice out of. The nicer and the riper the tomatoes are, the better they are when stuffed naturally. Sometimes out-of-season ones aren't very good. Now I'm going to take the pulp out with a little grapefruit knife. And then you can save the pulp for something else, like a soup or if you were making a braised meat of some kind, you could put that in. So there's the pulp out. And then, so that they'll have a little flavor, put a little bit of salt on. Then turn them upside down to drain so they won't all be gooey inside. And then set those aside, and then we are ready for our filling. And you could use all kinds of things as a filling, but I think I shall use some cold scrambled eggs, which sounds possibly a rather strange type of a filling, but it's delicious. As you will see, we're going to start out with some butter and a little bit of our chopped shallots. Get that a little softer. And then put in some of our chopped scallions. I didn't chop those terribly well, but it doesn't make too much difference. And then we have, for 4 people, I think 3 eggs will be enough. Haste makes waste. I dropped a little bit of shell in there. And there's our other egg. And they get beaten up. I think chopsticks are rather fun to do things with. The Japanese, when they make that tempura, always seem to beat their eggs with chopsticks. Besides, I like to cook bacon with it too. A little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper. And then we're ready to scramble. Now I'm going to do these eggs the French way, which means that they're done rather slowly. So I put the pan on and off heat. The idea of the French scramble is that the eggs slowly come up to their coagulation point. You can do them in a double boiler, but I think that takes an awfully long time. And of course, with scrambling such a few as this, you don't have a very deep group of eggs in the pan, but the idea is to keep stirring. And then if they all coagulate at once, it's sort of like a custard. Now I'm putting it down on the heat a little bit more. But if you scramble them too fast, they get, they're hard and they don't have that lovely, soft beauty that the French scramble does. Now when they've practically coagulated, take them off heat and see if they're about the way you like them. And then if they're a little too hard, you usually have a few drops of egg left in your pan, which you can pour in. Now our eggs are all ready, so we can fill the tomatoes with them. And we have a dish here, and I'll decorate it with some watercress. Remember, when you buy watercress, if you keep it practically submerged in water, it stays fresher much longer. So I'll put a little bit on each side. And then put the cold scrambled eggs in the tomatoes. Cold scrambled eggs actually taste just about like hard-boiled eggs. And I don't know why people don't use them cold a little more often, because they're very nice. Particularly if you have a little bit of scallions or shallots in. There, and there's our fourth egg. Now we should decorate the tops of them. And you can put in a little bit of an anchovy on top of each one. That always goes nicely because it gives you a little salt effect. And then some capers are nice because they give it a little bit of excitement. And then a bit of parsley on top. You could use green pepper or, there's my parsley. And just a little decoration of parsley. And there's your first course all ready. So that can go over here, and we might take a look and see how our peas are doing. Those are doing very nicely. Now we have some extra watercress here, and I'm going to put some watercress in with the peas because they're going to be pureed, and the watercress gives them an added flavor and then also an added bit of green color, which is very nice. And so we are now doing quite well. Let's see, we've only had about 10 minutes or so. And so we're now ready for our main course, which is going to be ham. And this is sliced ham, which I just bought in a package and then cut into serving pieces. It's that ready cooked ham, and it's very good for a quick dinner. I'm going to heat up some oil and a little bit of butter and saute the ham. Now, let's see if I'm following my thing. Yes, ham, start. That's correct. Now put the ham in, and be sure that the ham is dry before you put it in the pan, because you want it to just brown very lightly. It's already cooked, so you don't have to do too much fussing about it. You just want a little bit of brown. And while that's now beginning to brown, we will prepare part of the sauce for it. This is a very nice sauce. In France, this would be called jambon à la crème. You want 2 good dollops of strong French mustard and just about a tablespoon of tomato paste, because you want some color, and then a little bit of cream. That's some heavy cream. And stir that all up, and that gives a nice flavor and also a thickening. You can always add a little bit of more cream later. We don't want it to be nice and thick. And then turn over the ham. So it only takes really just about a minute or 2 on each side. It's just a bare browning to give it added flavor. Now let's see how those peas are doing nicely, and we'll now take a look at the leeks. That's doing very nicely. That's cooking at a good pace. I want to have the liquid almost all evaporated by the time the leeks are done. And our ham sauce is all right. And let's see how this is doing. You know, I don't think before I went to France I'd ever thought of ham slices in the cream and Madeira sauce, but it's just delicious. And there's one of the elegant restaurants in France, I think it is at Saulieu, has a ham done very much this way, and people pay hundreds of dollars for it. And so now we can take the ham out. You see, that's just a very brief saute. Then it gets a little warming up later. Then we want to have some more of our scallions in. And then here comes the Madeira, which goes in. About a quarter of a cup. You can always add more if you want it. Then we want a little meat flavor, so I'm going to use some canned beef bouillon. Of course, homemade bouillon would be lovely. We want that to boil down. And I think by this time that the peas are about ready to puree. See, the watercress is limp, and so I'm going to puree these in a food mill. One of these things, which is supposed to stay together. I decided to put it in properly. There. I like to puree it in the food mill rather than the electric blender because I don't like, in this instance, to have the peas too much sort of like baby food in this case. I like the blender often for soup, but for vegetables I like a little bit of consistency. And I'm putting this through the coarse blade here. There's always the watercress sticks on the top, so it has to be pushed down under. You want to be sure with this that you don't overcook the watercress, because if you do, you won't have that lovely green. The green fades out with overcooking. There, that's going through nicely. And then I have to scrape it off the bottom. This is the most beautiful green color. It sort of almost doesn't look real, but it is. And that goes back into the dish. And then this you can do ahead, but don't leave it overheat. Reheat it shortly before you're serving it. And let's look again at our leeks, which are doing very nicely. I'm just going to reduce that liquid a little tiny bit. And now we have our ham. Again, as you notice, you want to boil down your Madeira and your beef stock until the liquid is almost syrupy. And then at that point, you can put in your sauce, and that was the mustard, tomato paste, and cream. It doesn't make too much difference how much of this you put in. You just don't want to put in too much tomato paste. It should have just sort of a light blush. And then the ham can go in, back again. And at this point, you can prepare this much ahead. Say with your first course, you would want to have your ham all ready, and then you can just set it aside, and then when you're changing your dishes, reheat it again. And spoon the sauce over it. And then it can just sit that way and be reheated when you are ready to serve. And so we'll say that we are now ready to serve. So let's see how we're doing. Oh, we still have 10 minutes. This is very good, I must say. And so there is have a hot platter, and then put your puree of peas in the middle. And then your ham goes on top of that. I should have centered that a little more. That's a very pretty color with that sort of slightly pink blush of the tomato and that lovely smell of the Madeira. And then the sauce goes over the ham. And then we have the leeks. And the leeks go round and round. There. And there's just a little bit of leek juice, and that can go on the top. These, I think you'll love leeks done this way if you want to. After they're tender, you can sprinkle them with cheese and put them under the broiler, and that is very nice. And I think as a final decoration, this ought to have a little tiny bit of parsley on the top, and that's all ready to serve. You could also get it ready on its plate and cover it with foil and keep it in the warming oven for just a little bit of time. So now we have quite a few minutes still, so I didn't have time to be neat for once. Oh, that's hot. So you see, with any kind of a dinner like this, if you have your little order of battle so that you know what you're going to start on, you can have these little cards filed, and then anytime you get into a spot, you could just take them out, and then you're ready to go, and you have done your thought processes ahead of time. So there are our sour cherries, which have been macerating, and we have to thicken them up because this is going to be cherries Jubilee, which are flamed, and we're going to thicken them with a little bit of arrowroot. Arrowroot is just a starch, and I don't know what it's made out of, something like the arrowroot, but it has the property of, after it's simmered for a little while, it becomes clear. For instance, if you used flour as a thickening, you'd have a cloudy sauce. But with the arrowroot, it thickens in the sauce, and then it clears up, as you'll see in a moment. I think I'll put a little more brandy in here. One thing is, if you're going to flame anything, you've got to be sure and have plenty of brandy or it won't flame. So I always go rather heavy on it because it's awfully embarrassing to get into the dining room and have all that drama about flaming things and then find that it just doesn't work. Now I think I'm going to put in a little bit of cherry juice. I think I've got enough brandy in there for the moment because we're going to have some more in just before we flame it. We want to get this good and hot. Now, when you're planning this dinner, so you can get your cherries all done, you can get the thickening up done, and then you can set it aside. And when you're changing your plates from the first course to the second one, you can, from your main course to your dessert, you can then heat your cherries, and then when you come into the dining room, it's very hot, and that's what they have to be for successful flaming. Now I'm going to get the ice cream, which I have. And that's all easier too if you have it all scooped out. And then that comes in just at the last moment. And I'll just take my timer in, just see how we're going to do. So, we're ready to go. So just remember, before you take your cherries and get them good and hot, and then you can go into the dining room and serve them. And then as soon as you get into the dining room, heat your flaming device, whatever it is, and set the cherries on. And then I told you we're going to have quite a bit of brandy, so put a little bit more in. As I said, it's just awful if you announce you're going to flame things and then it doesn't work. And then always put on a little bit of granulated sugar because that helps the flame to start. And so while those are heating up again, you again have to heat it after the brandy goes in. Let's take a look at our menu again. Here are our tomate farci à la portugaise, which means simply tomato stuffed with eggs and decorated with anchovies. And then here we have our ham course, which is jambon à la crème, and ham slices on a bed of pureed peas and watercress. And when you lift it up, put a little bit, lift it up so that the watercress goes underneath the ham and our braised leeks. And with that, you would serve a chilled rosé wine and some French bread. And that makes a really lovely main course and quite a bit different of having the peas and the watercress. And so now let's look at our cherries. I'm making sure that the flame is done. Of course, I think with all of these you have to practice a little bit. So I think it's about time that I can light it, because it looks as though it were hot. So I hope it is. Yep, that's gone. I could hear it come up. There, see? There you are. That certainly is a very simple and always dramatic dish. People seem to love to have things that are flambéed. So as soon as you've sort of done a little drama of lifting it up and down, you can then serve your ice cream and put your cherries over it. And those should be still flaming as you serve them. So there you are, and that makes an awfully nice dessert. I'll just serve another little bit of it. I think vanilla ice cream goes best with the cherries because you don't want to interfere with their nice flavor. Oh, that looks simply lovely. There. So as you see, if you plan things out, you can come up pretty well with a very nice dinner. And of course, this is really essentially a very simple one, but the effect is of really quite long planning. And I think it's always very nice to have a first course. And of course, this is the cook's tranquilizer. So I keep a file of fast meals, and with a few minutes of advanced planning and a good order of battle, you can produce a very good 3-course meal in half an hour, and you can even beat the clock. We got 2 minutes to go. So that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
Julia Child is co-author of the book Mastering the Art of French Cooking.